Three 5-year-old boys sat frozen in a leather booth at Leand, their plates of pasta untouched, the steam slowly fading into the air. They were heirs to the Moretti crime family, children born into a fortune worth billions, yet in that moment, they owned nothing that mattered. They had no voices. Not a single word had escaped their lips since the night metal twisted, fire blown, and their mother died in an explosion on the highway. Lucien Moretti, the most feared man in Chicago, would have traded every dock, every union, every square inch of his empire for one sound from them. A whisper. A cry. Even a scream. Tonight, he was close to surrendering, to accepting their silence as his lifelong punishment. What he didn't know was that the answer wouldn't come from a doctor's office or another sterile therapy room. It was already there, hidden in the shaking hands of a waitress who dared to break the rules, and in the quiet message she would leave behind on a dirty plate. Chicago rain didn't cleanse anything. It only made the city's grime shine. Lucien stepped out of his armored Cadillac Escalade, rain slicking the pavement beneath his polished shoes. His movements were sharp, controlled, predatory. He adjusted the cuffs of his custom Brioni suit as water soaked into his shoulders, as if the weather itself didn't dare inconvenience him. Behind him, three small figures climbed out with help from Silas, Lucien's head of security and oldest friend. Lau. Mateo. Rocco. The triplets looked like scaled-down reflections of their father, dark hair, olive skin, eyes far too old for 5 years on this earth. But where Lucien's silence was a weapon, theirs was an open wound that never stopped bleeding. "Table 4 is ready, Mr. Moretti," the maitre d' stammered, his face pale as paper. Everyone in Chicago knew Lucien Moretti. They knew the Moretti syndicate controlled the docks, the unions, and half the real estate stretching from the Loop to the Gold Coast. And they knew the S. Tory, the explosion, the loss, the three boys who never spoke again. Lucien didn't nod. He didn't acknowledge the man at all. He simply walked. The Gilded Fork, a high-end restaurant on Rush Street, was usually alive with conversation and clinking glassware. Tonight, the sound drained from the room as the Morettis entered. A thick, unnatural hush settled over the space. They were seated in a private booth at the back. The boys climbed onto the leather bench and sat shoulder to shoulder in perfect stillness. No fidgeting. No crayons thrown. No childish complaints. Just three small bodies, hands folded neatly in their laps, staring at the white tablecloth as if it were endless. "The usual for the boys?" Silas asked quietly, standing watch. "Yes," Lucien replied, his voice low and heavy enough to vibrate through the table. "And bring the 98 Barolo. Leave it open." Lucien steadied his sons. 11 months. That's how long it had been since the explosion on I-90. Since his wife Isabella was taken from them. The boys had been in the back seat, saved by reinforced steel and brutal luck. Their bodies were untouched, but their minds had absorbed every ounce of the blast. Lucien had brought in specialists from Zurich, speech therapists from New York, trauma counselors who charged more per hour than most people earned in a month. The verdict never changed. Selective mutism caused by severe trauma. Their voices were locked away in a vault, and Lucien, who could break into any bank and crush any enemy, couldn't find the key. Rage curled in his chest, familiar and useless. Not anger at his sons. Anger at himself. A king with no heirs. A father raising ghosts. "I'm sorry to interrupt." The softness of the voice cut through his thoughts. Lucien looked up. A waitress stood at the edge of the booth. She wasn't their usual server. Her uniform hung slightly loose on her thin frame, her name tag crooked, Sophie. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, chestnut strands falling around iced tea. Hat carried an uneasy mix of fear and stubborn resolve. "Where is Marco?" Lucien asked, his gaze sharpening. "He called in sick," Sophie said. "I'm covering the section." She didn't flinch under his stare, though her fingers clenched the order pad until her knuckles went white. "I have the spaghetti aglio for the boys," she continued. "Cut small. No parsley." just like the note said. She set 3 bowls down gently. The boys didn't react. Not to the smell of garlic. Not to the warmth of the plates. Their eyes stayed fixed on the table. Lucien exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. They won't eat it. Take it away. They haven't even looked at it yet, Sophie said before she could stop herself. Lucien's head snapped up. Excuse me? Silas stepped forward, his hand drifting toward his jacket. Sophie swallowed. She had just talked back to the most dangerous man in Chicago. I just mean, they don't look hungry, sir, she said quietly. They look bored. And sad. They are traumatized, Lucien said coldly. Leave us. Sophie hesitated. Her eyes flicked back to the boys. To Rocco, the one on the far left, who was tracing the wood grain of the table with slow, deliberate focus. It wasn't emptiness. It was concentration. I'll check back, she whispered, retreating toward the kitchen. Lucien barely noticed her leaving. He turned back to his sons. Leo, he said softly. Please. Eat. Silence. The dinner unfolded as it always did. Lucien drank his wine. The boys nudged food across their plates with mechanical movements, eating only enough to survive. The air at the table felt like stone. Not a meal. A mausoleum. 40 minutes later, Lucien raised a hand. Bring the check. Another failure. Another night lost. Clear the table, he ordered. Sophie returned, stacking plates carefully. When she reached for Rocco's dish, her hand brushed his. He didn't pull away. She froze. Sophie was an artist, waiting tables to pay off her father's gambling debts. She saw the world in shapes, shadows, and intention. And she noticed how Rocco's eyes lingered on the sauce smeared along the rim of his plate. An idea sparked. Reckless. Dangerous. She flipped the check presenter over to its blank cardboard back and grabbed a crayon from the untouched kid's cup. What are you doing? Lucien asked, his voice sharpening into steel. Wait, Sophie said. In quick, confident strokes, she drew a lion, simple, rough, but alive. One thing was missing. A mouth. She slid the drawing in front of Rocco. Then she dipped her finger into the leftover marinara and gently painted a smiling mouth onto the lion's face. She met Rocco's eyes. He can't roar, she whispered, unless you give him a voice. Lucien tensed, ready to order Silas to remove her. This wasn't kindness. This was mockery. And then Rocco inhaled. A sound escaped his lips. Not a word. Not yet. But a breath. No one in the restaurant expected anything to happen. Least of all Lucien Moretti. To him, it was just a waitress humoring his broken children, playing pretend doctor with crayons and pasta sauce to pass the time. Another well-meaning stranger who would fail, just like the specialists, the therapists, the experts with framed diplomas and quiet pity in their eyes. And then Rocco moved. The smallest movement. Barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't watching, like a man drowning for air. The boy, who hadn't willingly moved his hands for anything beyond instinct and survival in nearly a year, slowly lifted his finger. His hand trembled as it hovered over the plate. Lucien's breath caught in his throat. Rocco dipped his finger into the red sauce. The world seemed to pull inward. The clink of silverware. The soft jazz drifting through the dining room. The murmur of conversations and polished laughter. All of it faded into a dull, distant hum. Rocco didn't draw on the paper. He looked up. He looked at Sophie. Then, with a shaking hand, he dragged his finger along the rim of the white plate, leaving behind a thin, uneven line. It rose and fell. Sharp. Uneven. A mountain. A pulse. A heartbeat. Sophie leaned closer, lowering herself to the boy's level. Her voice dropped to a whisper so quiet only they, and Lucien, could hear it. Is that where you are? She asked gently. In the dark? Rocco nodded. Once. Then again. Lucien's heart slammed against his ribs like a trapped bird. It was the first response. The first acknowledgement of the world beyond his own silence. Sophie didn't stop. She turned to the other two boys. Leo. Matteo. Her eyes searched their faces, patient, unafraid. Are you there too? Leo dipped his finger into the sauce. His movements were careful, deliberate. He drew a wide circle around Rocco's jagged line, a barrier, a shield, enclosing it. Sophie swallowed. Her voice trembled despite herself. She looked up at Lucien, eyes glassy with emotion. They're not mute because they can't speak, Mr. Moretti, she whispered. They're mute because they're guarding something. Lucien's voice came out rough, scraped raw by disbelief. Guarding what? Sophie looked back at the plate. At the sauce. At the marks no one else would understand. The secret. And then, for the first time in 11 months, a sound came from the booth. It wasn't a word. It was a hum. Low. Vibrating. Unsteady. It came from Matteo. Lucien stared down at the sauce-stained plate. To anyone else, it looked like a mess. A child's distraction. To him, it was a map. A message carved out of fear and courage. He slowly raised his eyes to the waitress, seeing her clearly for the first time. Who are you? He asked. Sophie wiped the sauce from her fingers onto her apron. Her voice was calm, almost shy. I'm just Sophie, she said. And your sons are terrified of something that isn't in this room. The drive back to the Moretti estate in Lake Forest felt different that night. The silence inside the car wasn't empty. It was alive. Charged with something unsaid. Lucien watched his sons through the REA. Review mirror. Rocco stared at his finger, faintly stained red from the sauce, as if it were proof the moment had really happened. Lucien reached for his phone. Silas, he said quietly. I want a file on the waitress. Sophie Clark. Everything. I want it on my desk by the time I walk through the front door. Done, came the immediate reply. The Moretti estate rose from the darkness like a fortress pretending to be a home. High stone walls. Cameras. Armed guards moving with trained precision. Dobermans pacing the perimeter. It was supposed to be impenetrable. And yet Sophie's words echoed in his mind. They're terrified of something that isn't in this room. Lucien poured himself a whiskey in his study. The scent of aged leather and tobacco clung to the air. 10 minutes later, Silas entered, tablet in hand. Sophie Clark, he began. 24. Dropped out of the Art Institute of Chicago 2 years ago. Father, Harold Clark. Known gambler. Heavy debt to the Ricci family on the South Side. Mother died when Sophie was 10. No criminal record. Lives alone in a studio apartment in Logan Square. Behind on rent. Lucien didn't turn. She has debt, he said flatly. Leverage. She's desperate, Silas corrected. And desperate people are dangerous. They can be bought, or they can be useful. Lucien stared at his reflection in the darkened window. The doctors failed, he said quietly. Tonight, a waitress with pasta sauce got my son to nod. Another to hum. She saw what the experts missed. Silas hesitated. What do you want to do? Bring her here tomorrow, Lucien said. 9 a.m. Silas frowned. Boss, bringing a civilian, especially one with debt tied to a rival family, inside the estate is a risk. Lucien turned. My sons are already gone, he said coldly. I have nothing left to risk. The next morning, Sophie Clark woke to pounding on her door. She wasn't surprised. It was the first of the month. Either the landlord wanted rent, or the Ricci enforcers were looking for her father. She opened the door, already rehearsing her apology. Instead, she found two men in suits that cost more than her entire building. "Miss Clark," one said. His scarred face never softened. "Mr. Moretti requests your presence." It wasn't a request. Sophie's stomach dropped. The man from the restaurant, she thought. The terrifying one. Had she done something wrong? I have a shift at 11, she stammered. "Your shift is canceled," the man said. "Your rent is paid for the next 6 months. Please come with us." Paid. 6 months. Her hands shook as she grabbed her coat. "You didn't say no to the Morettis." The drive to Lake Forest took 40 minutes. When the iron gates opened, Sophie gasped. It wasn't a house. It was a castle. Cold gray stone. Dark windows. Beautiful and utterly unforgiving. She was led into a 2-story library. Lucien Moretti stood by the fireplace. In daylight, he was even more intimidating. Tall. Broad-shouldered. A face carved from stone. Eyes sharp, intelligent, and completely devoid of warmth. "Mr. Moretti," Sophie said softly. "Miss Clark," he replied. He didn't offer his hand. "Sit." She perched on the edge of a velvet chair. "You have a talent," he said bluntly. "With children. Or with mine." "I just notice things," Sophie said. "My mom was sick for a long time. I learned to read people who couldn't speak." Lucien studied her. "My sons have selective mutism," he said. "Since their mother died." He took a sip of espresso. "I want you to fix them." Sophie froze. "I'm not a doctor," she said. "I'm a waitress. I draw pictures." "The doctors are useless," Lucien cut in. "You got a reaction. I want more. I can't just." "I'll erase your father's debt," Lucien said calmly. $50,000. Today. You move in. You work for me. $10,000 a month. Sophie's breath left her lungs. And everything changed. Some deals don't feel like choices. They feel like survival dressed up as consent. And the moment Sophie realized had Lucien Moretti was offering her, she knew this wasn't a job. It was a pact with something dark. She accepted it anyway. The Ritchie family were animals. Everyone knew that. Just last week, they'd broken her father's fingers one by one as a reminder that debts didn't expire, they accumulated. This offer from Lucien wasn't generosity. It was an exit. A narrow one, but still an exit. Lucien leaned back in his chair, his presence filling the shadowed library. Then his voice dropped, losing its polished calm and sinking into something colder. "There are rules," he said quietly. "You see nothing. You hear nothing. And you speak to no one outside these walls about what happens in this house." He paused, letting the silence do the threatening for him. "If you betray me, Sophie, the Ritchie debt will be the least of your worries." She looked at him then. Really looked. He wasn't just intimidating, he was inevitable. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice because consequences followed him like gravity. But her thoughts drifted to the 3 little boys she'd seen earlier, huddled together in that booth like frightened animals shielding something precious. Their eyes hadn't been empty. They'd been watchful. Protective. Terrified. And beneath the fear, Sophie felt something unexpected pulling at her, not just the promise of money or safety. Curiosity. "I accept," she whispered. Lucien nodded once. No smile. No relief. Just confirmation. "Good. You start now. They're in the playroom. Don't fail me." Sophie left the library and stepped into the long marble hallway. Every footstep echoed too loudly. The walls felt closer than they should have, like she was being swallowed by the house itself. By the time she reached the playroom at the far end, her chest felt tight. The room was overflowing with luxury, electric cars, towering Lego builds, shelves of pristine video games. Toys most children could only dream of. The triplets, Leo, Matteo, and Rocco, weren't touching any of it. They sat on the floor in a tight circle, facing one another. When Sophie entered, all three turned at the same time. Their eyes were different now. Sharp. Aware. Rocco stood. Without a word, he walked to the whiteboard in the corner and picked up a black marker. He drew a woman with long hair. He labeled her Sophie. Then, slowly, deliberately, he drew a large X over her mouth. He turned to her, face solemn, and pressed a finger to his lips. Shoo! A chill crawled down Sophie's spine, nothing to do with the air conditioning. This wasn't just trauma. Lucien was right. These boys weren't broken. They were guarding something. Okay, Sophie whispered, gently closing the door behind her. I won't tell. But you have to show me. The first week at the Moretti estate felt less like employment and more like elegant confinement. The house was massive, silent, and constantly watched. Armed men patrolled the halls. Doors closed softly but with finality. Silas, the head of security, never stopped watching her. His gaze followed her like a predator's, measuring, evaluating. Only the nursery felt different. It was the one place where the tension loosened its grip, just a little. Sophie didn't push the boys to speak. She knew better than to force language where silence was armor. Instead, she brought chaos. Not the sterile, expensive art supplies Lucien had ordered, but finger paints. Clay. Charcoal. Massive rolls of butcher paper taped directly onto the walls. We're going to make a mess, she told them on Tuesday. And we're not cleaning it up until we feel like it. Leo, the protector, frowned skeptically. Matteo, the sensitive one, leaned closer. Rocco grabbed a chunk of black charcoal without hesitation. For 3 days, they drew. Sophie drew with them, Chicago's skyline, the furious face of the matriarch from the restaurant, even a clumsy sketch of herself tripping over a cat. Matteo laughed. It was soft and silent, but it was laughter all the same. Then Thursday came. Lucien had been gone for 2 days. Business, a word Sophie understood, meant violence and money intertwined. When he returned, the house changed. Guards stood straighter. The air felt sharper, heavier. Sophie knelt on the floor beside Rocco, watching him draw the same image again and again. A red bird. Not natural. Angular. Sharp. More symbol than creature. Like a logo burned into memory. What is that? Sophie asked gently. Rocco froze. His eyes flicked to the door. The handle turned. Instantly, the boys scattered, scrambling into the corner and pressing together in silence. Sophie stood, wiping charcoal from her hands. The man who entered wasn't Lucien. He was younger, late 20s, with a flashy smile that never reached his eyes. His suit was too loud. His gold watch too large. So this is the miracle worker, he said smoothly. I'm Dante Moretti. Lucien's cousin. I handle logistics. His gaze roamed the drawings until it landed on the red bird. Did they draw this? He asked casually, too casually. They draw lots of things, Sophie said, stepping between him and the wall. They're children. Dante's eyes hardened. Lucien thinks you can fix them. I think broken things should be discarded. They aren't things, Sophie replied, her voice shaking but steady. They're boys. And they're healing. Dante stepped closer. His cologne was overpowering, mixed with stale smoke. Be careful, Sophie. This house eats people, especially pretty little things who ask questions. Dante. The voice thundered from the doorway. Lucien stood there, rain dripping from his coat, exhaustion etched into his face, but his stare was lethal. Out of the nursery. Dante smirked, tossed a wink at the boys, and left. Lucien didn't look at Sophie. His attention went to the drawing. "What is that?" he asked. "Rocco was drawing it," Sophie said. "Do you recognize it?" Lucien frowned. "No. It looks like a hawk. Or a phoenix." He knelt in front of the boys, suit pants touching the messy floor without a second thought. "Leo. Matteo. Rocco," he said gently. And Sophie understood whatever secret these boys were protecting. It was powerful enough to frighten monsters. The change in his voice was immediate. A stark, almost unsettling contrast to how he had spoken to Dante just moments earlier. "Did Uncle Dante scare you?" Lucien asked gently. The boys nodded in unison. Lucien crouched in front of them, his massive frame lowering until he was eye level. "He won't hurt you," he said softly. "I promise." Then, one by one, he kissed each of them on the forehead. It was a moment so tender it felt unreal, coming from a man whispered about in Chicago as the Butcher. A man whose name alone made grown men flinch. Lucien straightened and turned to Sophie. "Dinner tonight. 8 o'clock. After they're asleep. We need to talk." "I usually eat in the kitchen," Sophie replied automatically. "Not tonight." Dinner was served in the main dining room, a vast, echoing space grand enough to host political summits and criminal alliances alike. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead. The mahogany table stretched nearly 20 feet, polished to a mirror shine. Sophie felt absurd sitting there in her simple knit dress, across from Lucien in his tailored black suit. The staff moved silently, setting plates, pouring wine, retreating without a sound. They ate in silence for several minutes. Sophie pushed her risotto around the plate. "You don't like it?" Lucien asked. "It's delicious," she said quickly. "I'm just not used to being waited on." Lucien lifted a hand. The staff vanished. Heavy doors closed with a final, echoing thud, sealing them alone beneath the chandelier. "Dante is ambitious," Lucien said, cutting straight to the point. "He thinks I'm weak because I'm grieving. He thinks my sons are weak because they don't speak." He paused, swirling the wine in his glass. "He scared them," Sophie said. "And it wasn't just intimidation. It was specific. When he looked at that drawing, the red burr. D. Lucien's eyes darkened. "I had Silas check every rival faction. Every gang symbol. Every corporate logo in the tri-state area. Nothing matches it." "Maybe it isn't a logo," Sophie said quietly. "Maybe it's something personal. A hood ornament. A tattoo." Lucien stopped swirling the wine. "You think they saw something?" he asked slowly. "The night of the accident?" "I think they saw everything," Sophie whispered. "The doctors say they blocked it out. I don't think they did. I think they're holding it in." She swallowed. "They're afraid that if they speak, the bad thing will happen again." Lucien set his fork down. The sharp clink against china rang louder than it should have. "The police report said mechanical failure," he said. "Brake line snapped. Car spun off the bridge." His eyes lifted to hers. "Do you believe that?" "I don't know. I'm a mob boss, Sophie," Lucien said flatly. "I don't believe in accidents." His gaze was a dark tunnel. Endless. Cold. "But my car was checked that morning," he continued. "Silas checked it himself. If someone sabotaged it, they had access to the garage." Sophie hesitated, then took the risk. "Someone like Dante?" Lucien's jaw tightened. "Dante is family," he said. "And in our world, family is the only thing that keeps you alive. If you can trust them," Sophie said softly. "Cain and Abel were family too." For a long moment, Lucien simply stared at her. The tension between them crackled, sharp, electric. He wasn't looking at her as an employee anymore. Or a caretaker. He was looking at her as someone who dared challenge him. "You have sauce on your lip," he said quietly. Sophie flushed and reached to wipe it away, but Lucien leaned forward instead. His thumb brushed the corner of her mouth. His skin was rough, calloused. His touch impossibly gentle. Sophie forgot how to breathe. "Sophie," he murmured, his voice low. "You are dangerous for me." "Why?" she asked. "Because you make me hope." The moment shattered with a violent crash. From upstairs, Lucien was moving before Sophie even processed the sound. A gun appeared in his hand, pulled from a holster hidden beneath the table. He was already sprinting for the stairs. Sophie ran after him. They burst into the nursery. The room was dark. The triplets stood frozen in the center, wide-eyed, pointing at the wall. A lamp lay shattered on the floor. But it hadn't been thrown in anger. They had been trying to hit something. Leo pointed frantically toward the ventilation grate near the ceiling. "What is it?" Lucien demanded, scanning for intruders. Silas and 2 guards rushed in, weapons raised. Rocco grabbed Sophie's hand, tugging her closer to the wall. He mimed removing something, pressing it to his ear. "The vent," Sophie said. "Check the vent." Silas dragged over a chair, climbed up, and unscrewed the grate. His hand disappeared into the duct. When he pulled it back, a small black device sat in his palm. A transmitter. A listening bug. The room fell into dead silence. Lucien took the device. His face showed no rage, only something colder. Controlled. Terrifying. "It's active," he said quietly. "Someone has been listening." "The therapy sessions," Sophie whispered. "The boys playing. Dinner tonight." Lucien crushed the device in his fist. "Silas," he said. "Sweep the entire house. Every room. Every fixture. Now." Silas nodded, pale. "Boss, this is military grade. Not family tech." "I don't care who made it," Lucien snapped. "I care who planted it." He turned to the boys. They huddled together, but this time, they weren't just afraid. They looked expectant. Matteo stepped forward. He walked to the Legos scattered on the floor and began to build. A black car. A small red shape. He slid the red piece beneath the car. Then he took a Lego figure, marked its face red, and placed it beside the car. "Red face?" Sophie asked gently. Matteo shook his head. He pointed to the charcoal drawing, the red bird, then to the Lego man's neck. "The man with the red bird," Sophie said. Matteo nodded hard. "The man with the red bird put something under the car," Lucien said hollowly. "The bomb." "Who is the man with the red bird?" Sophie asked. Lucien looked to Silas. "Anyone with that mark?" "No," Silas said. "I know every tattoo on every man we employ." Sophie stared at the Lego figure again. The red wasn't just on the face, it was on the neck. "A neck tattoo," she said. "Or a scarf." Her breath caught. "Lucien," she whispered. "When Dante was here, his collar shifted when he leaned over me." Lucien turned slowly. "I saw something red," Sophie said. "On his neck. Just below his ear. I thought it was a rash." Lucien looked at Silas. "Bring Dante to the warehouse," he said calmly. "Now." "He's at the poker game." "Now." They thought the house was quiet. They thought fear had already won. They thought the last voice that could stop them had been silenced forever. They were wrong. "Game in the West Loop tonight," Silas said coldly. "Take the team. Lift him." Before anyone could respond, a sharp sound cut through the room. "Wait." The word didn't come from Lucien. It didn't come from Sophie. It came from the corner. Everybody froze. Leo was standing there. His mouth was open, his face twisted in raw effort, the tendons in his neck standing out as if they might snap. Air forced its way through a throat locked shut by trauma and terror. For a full year, the boy hadn't spoken a single word. Now he was fighting his own silence. "No!" Leo screamed. The word tore out of him like something alive. He ran forward and wrapped himself around Lucien's leg, shaking his head violently, his whole body trembling as he cried it again. No! No! Lucien dropped to his knees instantly. Leo, he whispered, stunned. You spoke. You spoke, son. He cupped the boy's face, eyes glassy with disbelief. Why no? Why shouldn't I get Dante? Leo ripped free and grabbed a crayon from the table. His hand shook as he fell to the floor, dragging paper with him. He drew fast, frantic lines. A house. Flames licking up the walls. Stick figures, Lucien, Silas, the guards, walking away. Then he drew one more figure. The Redbird Man. Entering the house. Sophie sucked in a breath. It's a trap, she said softly, piecing it together as she stared at the drawing. If you leave, if you take the men to get Dante, the house is exposed. They want you gone, she said, turning to Lucien. They heard us find the bug. They know we know. So they're trying to pull you out. Pull us out for what? Silas asked. Leo pointed at himself. Then at his brothers. To finish the job, Lucien whispered. The realization hit like ice water. They didn't just want Isabella dead, he said quietly. They want the heirs. All of them. They want the bloodline erased. Lucien rose to his feet. The cold calculation in. His eyes vanished, replaced by something far worse. Fire. Silas, he said evenly. Cancel the order. Lock down the estate. Code Black. Nobody in, nobody out. Activate the perimeter defenses. Yes, boss. Lucien turned to Sophie. Take the boys, he said. Basement. Safe room. Do not open that door for anyone but me. Not Silas. Not anyone. Only me. What are you going to do? Sophie asked, clutching the boy's hands. Lucien racked the slide of his gun, the sound sharp and final. I'm going to welcome my cousin, he said. If he wants inside. I'll leave the front door open. The safe room was hidden behind a false wall in the wine cellar, steel-lined, soundproofed, stocked for siege. Food. Water. Camera feeds from every corner of the estate. Sophie sat on the floor with the triplets as the door sealed shut. The boys were calm now. Strangely calm. They had done what they needed to do. They had broken their silence to save their father. You're so brave, Sophie whispered, pulling them into her arms. Leo. I heard you. You saved us. Leo looked exhausted, but a small, proud smile flickered across his face. On the monitors, the nightmare began. Perimeter lights blinked out one by one. The estate fell into darkness. Then came the flashes. Muzzle fire. Shadows moving along the walls. Men poured in, not street thugs, not amateurs. Professionals. Coordinated. Precise. But Lucien was ready. Sophie watched him move through his own home like a ghost, using angles and darkness, striking fast and disappearing again. This wasn't a rich criminal defending his house. This was a soldier. Then one scream made her blood run cold. Dante. He led a 6-man team through the east wing, assault rifle raised. His face was tight, focused. No smile this time. He's going for the nursery, Sophie whispered. He thinks we're upstairs. Dante kicked the door open and sprayed bullets into empty cribs. Sophie gagged, bile burning her throat. Dante screamed in rage, the sound silent on the feed. ESP. Pointing downward. Basement. They know, Sophie gasped. They know about the safe room. Her eyes darted to the steel door. It was meant to be impenetrable. But Dante was family. He would know the codes. He would know the override. Sophie scanned the room. No weapons. Just water. Blankets. Okay, she said, forcing her voice steady. We're going to play a game. The boys looked at her. Hide and seek, she said. The best hide and seek ever. She opened a ventilation hatch at the back of the room. Too small for adults. Just big enough for 5-year-olds. Crawl, she said. Keep going until you see light. That's the garden vent. Then run to the greenhouse. Hide under the potting tables. Don't make a sound. Rocco shook his head, gripping her hand. No, Sophie sobbed. You have to. I'm too big. I'll hold the door. She knelt in front of them, tears streaming. Leo, protect your brothers. Mateo, quiet as a mouse. Rocco, watch everything. They hesitated. Go, she hissed. They crawled into the vent just as the lock beeped. Beep. 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 Override. Sophie sealed the grate and grabbed the only thing she had, a heavy wine bottle she'd pulled before closing it. Ridiculous against guns. But it was something. The steel door groaned open. Dante stood there, wild-eyed, suit torn, dust streaking his face. Where are they? He snarled. He saw the empty blankets. He saw Sophie alone. She raised the bottle like a club. Dante laughed. Smart girl. But this room's a dead end. He aimed at her chest. Tell me where they are, and I'll make it quick. Sophie stood tall. She thought of the life she'd wasted. And the 3 boys who trusted her. Go to hell, she spat. Dante grinned. Ladies first. The gun fired. The sound shattered the room. Sophie waited for pain. It never came. Dante's eyes widened. Red bloomed across his chest. He collapsed forward. Behind him stood Lucien, gun smoking, face shattered by grief. He had just killed his own blood. Lucien stepped over the body. And the house finally fell silent. He didn't even glance at the body on the floor. Lucien rushed straight to Sophie, gripping her shoulders with desperate force. Where are they? He demanded, his voice raw. Where are the boys? The vent, Sophie sobbed, lifting a shaking hand to point. I sent them through the vent. I sent them to the greenhouse. Lucien pulled her into his arms. It wasn't romantic. It was survival. It was a man clinging to the one thing keeping him upright. He held her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in the crook of her neck. His body trembled uncontrollably. You saved them, he whispered, his voice breaking against her hair. You saved them. You saved them, Lucien, Sophie said softly, pulling back just enough to look at him. Her eyes were red, her face streaked with soot and tears. Dante, he had a tattoo. I saw it when he fell. A red bird on his neck. I know, Lucien replied grimly. But Dante wasn't the head of the snake. He was just the muscle. Sophie stared at him. What do you mean? Lucien turned and walked toward Dante's body. He knelt, reached into the dead man's jacket, and pulled out a phone. The screen was lighting up. Buzzing. Without hesitation, Lucien answered and put it on speaker. Is it done? A voice asked. Sophie froze. It was a voice she recognized instantly, smooth, refined, older. Cultured. The kind of voice that belonged in courtrooms and charity galas. Is the nanny dead? The voice continued calmly. Are the brats gone? Lucien stared at the phone, his expression turning to stone. Hello, Judge, he said. The line went dead. Silence swallowed the room. Lucien turned slowly to Sophie. That was Judge Holloway. My father's oldest friend. The man who handles all our legal affairs. The man who holds the keys to the family trust. Sophie's breath caught. Why? Lucien looked toward the vent where his sons had crawled to safety. Understanding crashed into him like a wave of ice. Because if my Ons die, he said quietly, the trust reverts to the executive. Sophie swallowed. To him? Lucien nodded once. He stared at the wall for a long moment, then his voice hardened into something unbreakable. The war isn't over, Sophie. It's just begun. But now we know who we're fighting. He took her hand. Come. We need to get our boys. They ran for the greenhouse. As they moved through the night, Sophie realized something had shifted forever. She wasn't just the nanny anymore. She was part of this family now. And somewhere in the chaos, fear, and bloodshed, she had fallen in love with the monster of Chicago. The greenhouse was cold. Glass panes were fogged with condensation, the humid night air trapped inside while the glow of fire from the ruined house flickered behind them. Lucien found his sons huddled beneath a potting bench, covered in soil, their wide eyes reflecting the red and blue flashes of approaching police cars. Cars Silas had called, not to arrest anyone, but to erase evidence. Lucien didn't take them back to the main house. It was a crime scene now. A sanctuary that had been violated beyond repair. Instead, he ushered Sophie and the boys into a plain black van waiting near the rear service exit. Where are we going? Sophie asked as she wiped dirt from Rocco's cheek with the torn hem of her dress. Her hands shook now that the adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep chill. The one place they won't look, Lucien said, eyes locked on a tablet as his fingers flew across the screen. The South Side. The old neighborhood. They drove in silence for 40 minutes, leaving behind the manicured lawns of Lake Forest for cracked pavement and rusted industrial skeletons of Chicago's forgotten districts. The van stopped in front of a converted warehouse that looked abandoned. Graffiti scarred the brick walls. Windows were barred. The building looked dead. Inside, it was anything but. It was a fortress. Lucien's first base of operations. The place where his empire was born, before the tailored suits, before society dinners. It smelled of old paper, gun oil, and memories. It's not much, Lucien said, locking the heavy steel door behind them. But it's off the grid. No cameras connected to the web. No digital locks to hack. Just steel and stone. The boys looked around, fascinated. This wasn't a sterile mansion. It was rough. Real. Sophie settled them on a battered leather sofa that looked like it had survived a war. She found a first aid kit and returned to the main room. Lucien stood at the window, peering through the blinds at the empty street. His jacket was gone. His white shirt was stained with Dante's blood. Sit, Sophie said softly, but firmly. Lucien looked like he wanted to argue. To pace. To plan the next move. But when he saw the resolve in her eyes, he exhaled and collapsed into a chair. She cleaned the shallow cut on his cheek where shattered glass had grazed him. Judge Holloway, Sophie said quietly. Why him? He's a judge. A pillar of the community, Lucien replied bitterly. My father's lawyer. He helped build the Moretti Trust. He knows where everyone is buried, financially and literally. When Isabella died, he was the first to call me. Sounded devastated. Lucien laughed without humor. He was probably celebrating. If he wiped out my line, the caretaker clause would trigger. He'd control the assets, billions, until a new heir could be established. Which would never happen if I was dead too. He's a monster, Sophie whispered. He's worse, Lucien said. A monster with a badge and a gavel. He's untouchable. If I kill a Supreme Court judge, the federal government rains hellfire on my family. I can't just shoot him like Dante. So we need proof, Sophie said immediately. Real proof. Lucien shook his head. The bug is gone. Dante's dead. The mercenaries had no IDs. We have nothing. We have the boys, Sophie said. Lucien glanced at the sofa. The triplets slept in a tangled pile, peaceful at last. They're 5, he said. And they're mute. They aren't, Sophie corrected gently. Leo spoke. They're finding their voices, Lucien. They just need a reason to use them. The next morning, the warehouse smelled like bacon. Silas arrived with supplies and fresh clothes, his face grim. The press is calling it a home invasion. Holloway already released a statement, calling for tougher laws against organized crime. He's using the attack he ordered to boost his image. Lucien slammed his fist onto the metal table. He's mocking me. Across the room, Sophie sat on the floor with the boys. They were drawing again, but this time, it was different. Mateo was sketching a building. A massive gray structure with tall pillars. Rocco leaned over, adding details. Sophie's heart skipped. They weren't drawing nonsense anymore. They were remembering. They thought the truth had died with twisted metal and cold water. They thought two children's memories would fade into silence. But sometimes, the smallest details survive disasters and come back sharp enough to cut. This time, it was a drawing that exposed everything. Leo sat at the table again, crayon spread like evidence. His small hand moved slowly, carefully. He wasn't just drawing shapes, he was remembering. This time, the figure wore a black robe, tall and looming. A judge. But something was different. The red bird Leo always drew, the one that haunted his nightmares, was no longer floating. This time, it was etched onto the man's hand. A ring. Sophie noticed it instantly. Her breath caught. Lucien, she called, sharper than before. Come look at this. Lucien crossed the room and leaned down. His eyes narrowed as he studied the page. A ring, he said slowly. Does Holloway even wear one? He went to Yale, Sophie replied. He'd have a class ring. But not, she stopped herself and pointed. Not this. Leo didn't draw a plain ring. He drew the bird on it. Lucien straightened. A signet ring, he murmured. Gold band. Red. Stone. I've never seen him wear anything like that, Lucien added, his voice uneasy. Maybe he doesn't wear it in court, Sophie said, her thoughts racing. Maybe he only wears it when he's with them. The people who do his dirty work. She grabbed her phone, a burner Silas had given her, and started searching. Judge Arthur Holloway Gala, she muttered. Images filled the screen. Bar Association dinner. No ring. Charity golf tournament. Still no ring. She scrolled faster. Then stopped. Wait. This one. The photo was older, 5 years back. A private fundraiser for the Chicago Heritage Foundation. Sophie zoomed in. Holloway's hand held a champagne flute, fingers relaxed. And there it was. A heavy gold ring. A carved carnelian stone. A red falcon. The Chicago Heritage Foundation, Lucien read aloud from the caption. His face darkened. That's not just a charity. It's a front. Old money. My father used to say they were the real Mafia. The kind that didn't need guns because they owned the police. If he wears that ring, Sophie said, standing now, pacing, it means he's proud of it. It's not jewelry. It's a badge. Her mind clicked into place. If the boys saw that ring, then he was there the night of the accident. Lucien went completely still. He told me he was in D.C. that weekend. He lied, Sophie whispered. They saw him. They saw the ring. On the hand that opened the car door, or tampered with the brakes. Lucien turned to his sons. His voice softened. Leo, did you see the man with the ring near the car? Leo's lip trembled. He nodded. The room went quiet. He was there, Sophie said. That's why they're terrified. It wasn't some faceless mechanic. It was the nice man who came to the house. The man who gave them candy. Lucien's jaw tightened. If he was there, he said, his voice dropping into something lethal, then there's footage. Toll booths. Traffic cameras near the bridge. If I know the time. Silas, Lucien barked. Pull the I-90 traffic. Archives for November 14th. Look for Holloway's private Lincoln Town car. Silas cracked his knuckles. On it. Lucien turned back to Sophie. You have a plan. I can see it. That look you get right before you do something reckless. Sophie smiled thinly and raised her phone. The Heritage Foundation's annual Grand Gala is tomorrow night. At the Art Institute of Chicago. Holloway's the guest of honor. Man of the Year. Lucien stared at her. And we're going to crash it, Sophie said. Not with guns. With art. The Art Institute glowed like a cathedral. Golden light washed over marble floors as Chicago's elite filled the hall, senators, CEOs, socialites dripping in diamonds. Laughter floated through the air like perfume. At the center of it all stood Judge Arthur Holloway, champagne in hand, smiling benevolently. Silver hair. Perfect tuxedo. A man who looked like order itself. He checked his watch. He was waiting for confirmation that Lucien Moretti had been found dead in a ditch. Judge Holloway, a woman gushed. Your speech about cleaning up the city, so inspiring. Thank you, Holloway replied smoothly. We must all do our part to remove the stain of criminal elements from our streets. The lights flickered. Then dimmed. A hush rolled through the hall. A spotlight snapped on at the grand staircase. Music surged, not strings, but something heavy, operatic, ominous. Lucien Moretti appeared at the top. Gasps rippled through the crowd. He was supposed to be hiding. Or dead. Instead, he descended like a predator, his tuxedo immaculate, commanding the room with every step. And on his arm was Sophie Clark, not a debutante, but a queen. Her blood-red silk dress flowed like liquid fire. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Holloway stumbled back, his smile cracking. Ladies and gentlemen, Lucien's voice thundered through the hall without a microphone. I apologize for the interruption. But I heard my father's old friend was being honored tonight. The crowd parted as Lucy N walked forward. Security moved, then froze. Silas and a dozen Moretti men stepped from the shadows, dressed in suits, blocking every angle. A standoff in tuxedos. This is a private event, Holloway snapped. You are not welcome. I brought a gift, Lucien said calmly. A piece of art. Sophie stepped forward, carrying a large portfolio. She set it on an easel meant for auction listings. My sons have been very busy, Lucien said. They wanted you to see their latest work. Sophie opened the portfolio. The artwork was massive. Mixed media. Terrifyingly precise. A black car spiraling off a bridge. And in the reflection of the window, painted in brutal realism, was Arthur Holloway's face. On the hand resting on the sabotaged brake line was the ring. The Red Falcon. The crowd leaned in. Murmurs spread. This is nonsense, Holloway scoffed, sweat forming at his temples. A cartoon? You accuse me with a drawing? It's not a drawing, Lucien said quietly. It's a memory. From 3 eyewitnesses you tried to kill 3 days ago. Holloway sneered. Security. Remove this trash. We also have this, Sophie said, and reached into her bag. They thought the truth would stay buried forever. They thought money, power, and silence were unbreakable shields. But all it took was one screen, one moment, and 3 small voices to bring an empire crashing down. Sophie's fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the remote and pressed the button. Behind the stage, a massive projector screen descended in total silence. The air in the ballroom felt heavy, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Silas had done exactly what he promised. The footage flickered to life. Grainy. Black and white. Timestamped November 14th. The video showed a stretch of I-90 just miles before the bridge, traffic rushing past in blurred streaks of light. On the shoulder sat a Lincoln Town car, hazards flashing weakly. A man stepped out of the driver's seat and adjusted his coat against the cold. He walked forward toward a black SUV parked ahead of him. The Moretti family car. The man crouched down, leaning beneath the wheel well. His movements were careful, deliberate. When he stood back up, he didn't hurry away. Instead, he looked straight into the traffic camera. The face was unmistakable. Holloway. The silence in the room became absolute. No whispers. No gasps. Not even the clink of a glass. That is a deep fake. Holloway shouted suddenly, his voice cracking as panic tore through his polished mask. Technology tricks. You think a jury will believe this garbage? Lucien didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I don't need a jury, Arthur, he said calmly, stepping forward just enough to be felt. I only need the truth. You have nothing. Holloway screamed, unraveling completely. Nothing but broken children and a waitress. No one will testify. Your sons can't even speak. They're vegetables. Yes. We can. The voice was small, but it cut through the room like a blade. Every head turned. From behind the heavy velvet curtains at the edge of the stage, 3 small figures stepped into the light. Leo. Matteo. Rocco. Hand in hand. Their tiny tuxedos looked almost unreal against the grandeur of the hall. Rocco stepped forward first. He looked impossibly small beneath the towering chandeliers, but he stood exactly the way his father stood, straight, unyielding, unafraid. He lifted his hand and pointed directly at Holloway. You, Rocco said. His voice was rough from years of silence, but it was clear. Strong. You hurt Mommy, Matteo said, stepping up beside his brother. You cut the line, Leo finished. His voice was the strongest of all. 3 voices. 3 witnesses. 3 sons reclaiming everything that had been stolen from them. Holloway stared at the boys as if he were seeing ghosts. No, that's impossible, he muttered. You couldn't. You didn't see. We saw the bird, Rocco said quietly. Holloway's breath hitched. Without thinking, he covered his left H. And with his right. A tell. A confession written in instinct. Camera flashes exploded across the room. The press, originally there to cover a glamorous gala, now captured the collapse of the decade's most powerful man. Sirens wailed outside. Real sirens. FBI, Lucien said softly, stepping close enough that Holloway could feel his breath. We sent the footage an hour ago. They're here for the racketeering. The murder for hire. And the attempted murder of minors. He leaned in, voice low and final. It's over, Arthur. Holloway looked around desperately. His allies were stepping back. Donors avoided his eyes. Faces that once smiled at him now twisted with disgust. He was alone. The fight drained out of him all at once, and his shoulders sagged. It was for the stability of the city, he whispered weakly. You Morettis, you're chaos. We are family, Lucien replied. And you don't touch family. FBI agents flooded the hall, snapping handcuffs onto Holloway's wrists and escorting him away through a tunnel of flashing cameras. Lucien didn't watch him go. Instead, he turned toward his sons. He dropped to his knees, not caring as his tuxedo pants hit the marble floor. He opened his arms, voice breaking. Boys. Leo, Matteo, and Rocco ran to him. They collided with his chest, burying their faces against him, and they cried, not the quiet, frozen tears of trauma, but loud, raw sobs of release. Years of pain poured out in that moment. Sophie watched from the edge of the room, tears streaming freely down her face. A hand rested gently on her shoulder. Silas. He was smiling. Truly smiling. You did good, kid, he said. Sophie wiped her eyes and turned toward the exit. Her work was done. The debt was paid. The mystery solved. The boys were safe. This world, of cameras and power and wealth, was never meant for her. Sophie. Lucien's voice stopped her. He stood now, Rocco in his arms while the other two clung to his legs. He looked at her across the crowded ballroom. Where are you? Going? I'm going home, she said softly. The contract's over. Lucien walked toward her as the crowd watched in stunned silence. The feared Mafia Don, the butcher, looked at a waitress with an intensity that could burn down a city. You are home, he said. I can't, Sophie whispered. I'm just a waitress. I'm a man who was lost in the dark, Lucien replied. And you were the only one who knew how to draw the map out. He took her hand. Stay, Rocco whispered. Stay, Matteo and Leo echoed. Sophie looked at the three boys who had stolen her heart, and the man who had once terrified her, then saved her. She glanced down at the red dress she wore, armor for a battle she had already won. She smiled. Okay, she whispered. But I'm charging overtime. Lucien laughed, a deep, genuine sound that echoed through the hall. He pulled her close and kissed her. It was a kiss that promised forever. The triplets cheered. Cameras flashed. And outside, the rain finally stopped, leaving the Chicago skyline clear and bright. And that's the incredible story of how one simple act of kindness shattered a silence that money and power never could. Because sometimes the strongest voice isn't the one that shouts. It's the one that quietly says, I see you. Lucien Moretti reclaimed his empire. But more importantly, he got his sons back. And Sophie? She went from waiting tables to becoming the heart of the most powerful family in Chicago. So remember, every silence hides a battle. Be the one who offers the crayon. Be the one who draws the smile. If this story moved you, smash that like button, it really helps the channel grow. What would you have drawn on the plate? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that stays with you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.